I think it's demonic, quite literally demonic, as in, worshiping Baphomet. And I'm going to use my platform.
You said worshiping what? I couldn't hear you. Sorry.
Baphomet.
Okay, got it.
It's 2024. Okay. Let's talk about the Bolshevik Revolution and what they did to Christians. About the nuns, and they found the mass burial, which allowed 85 Catholic churches to be. I'm a Christian. I'm offended by what you're saying, and you laugh. You mock Christian persecution.
You think I'm sinful because I'm married to a man?
Yeah.
You do?
Yes, you're sinning. You are in a sinful relationship.
Welcome back to Rattlesnake TV, guys. In this video, we are going to be watching Candace Owens taking on the big diva, Don Lemon. This one gets very spicy at times, guys, so we're going to review the best moments here. But just first of all, I wanted to have a listen to Don's introduction and what he says to Candace at the start. And we know, as well as she did, that it's just so disingenuous. Let's check it out.
Candace, I don't want this, if I can say this, to be, a moment where, people, you or anyone, we're looking for, this fiery moment that's going to go viral because people are going to click on it. I really do want to learn about you, and I want you to be able to explain some of the things that you said and whether you believe them, whether they were taken out of context or whatever. But can we start? Is that okay?
Yeah, I love that. I think that's really great. I just had a conversation with Russell Brand about the same thing. Like the left-right stuff is just getting really old and toxic. And I think we can all take each other out of context to make the other person look stupid. But I think people are more deserving of an actual conversation.
Okay, so as much as I appreciate good dialogue and good conversation, we also do have to appreciate here that you're not talking about your favorite flavor of pizza. They're delving into the realm of ideas, and these people are completely diametrically opposed ideologically. Yes, it's important to be respectful and dignified in these conversations, but Don Lemon is the gotcha moment queen. So Don, don't try and act like you're not going to go full CNN on her. And last point before we get into it, if you look at the numbers of Don Lemon's show on YouTube, it's really not going so well. Obviously, the Elon interview did big numbers, but since then, no one really cares. That's because nobody wants to watch Don Lemon sit there and have conversations with liberals and centrists. And the only way that he is going to stay relevant from here on in is to do these sorts of episodes where he has right-wing people come on his show to own him. Anyways, on to the next bit about Jan 6 and BLM.
There's a difference between something that happens to people naturally, right? We all get older. I have trouble sometimes recalling things that I'm like, oh, what's that senator again? What's that name again? And that happens to the best of us. But there is a difference between that and someone who is, a perpetual liar, or doesn't believe in democracy, or is an election denier. Those two things are not equal. And I think that is the premise of what Democrats are operating on right now. Joe Biden may not be the man he was 5 years ago or 20 years ago or 30 years ago, but he's still better than the alternative.
Yeah, obviously I fundamentally disagree with your assessment, and I think it's very strange coming from a party where Hillary Clinton denied the election results for years. And said that her election was stolen from her. It's very weird for people to suddenly just not remember that. Sometimes it feels like the press
there
just
was no insurrection around that. I mean, she eventually.
Well, now you're accusing him of the insurrection. He has nothing to do with.
No, I said, but there was no insurrection around that. I didn't mention.
You can say that or not, but you just said he's an election denier. Okay, well that would put Hillary Clinton in the exact same camp. And so it's very weird when there seems to be this sort of like Men in Black memory wipe where people pretend that suddenly Trump was the first person who questioned election results when that's been going on for a very long time in America and nobody cared about that.
Hear me out here. There's a difference between questioning an election, the results of an election, which happened with Al Gore and George Bush, than having almost every court in the land disagree with the assessment that the election was stolen. There's a difference between questioning an election than saying it was stolen. There's a difference between someone saying, I thought I should have won, and there were, I had all these wins that were, that were not at my back, than someone saying, you know what, the election was stolen, and that these people are heroes who actually desecrated the Capitol and beat up police officers, and a police officer ended up dying. That's a whole different thing. Those two are not equal.
So your old network even debunks the points that you just made. Obviously, the person that died that day was Ashley Babbitt, the only person who died on that day.
My old network does not debunk that.
They absolutely. I covered it on my show. Even
no,
CNN.
I work there. They do not. They do not.
Well, I have my computer. Do you want me to bring it up live? The CNN article where they debunked that Brian, who you're talking about, the police officer, died that day. He didn't.
I didn't say he died that day. I said
okay, correct. Let me finish this. You said he died because you're trying to make people believe that it had something to do with what happened. He died of a stroke, a completely unrelated stroke days later. So that narrative that was quickly pushed out by CNN was then subsequently debunked. So the only person that died that day was Ashley Babbitt, and Ashley Babbitt was a Trump supporter. So only a Trump supporter died on that day. Regarding the insurrection narrative, there are questions that still have not been answered that seem implausible to me. I happened to be on that day in DC, 9 months pregnant, and it's just stunning to me that that whole summer DC burned and nobody cared, and then suddenly people are talking about an insurrection and nobody is asking the common sense question of why the FBI, while they can lock up grandmas for having walked into the Capitol, some of these charges are heinous, absolutely heinous. You see these people on camera just for simply walking in at the beckoning of security guards who allowed them in, were put into prison for a very long time. So I'll ask you the question: do you think it's a legitimate stance, or that it's legitimate that the FBI can't figure out who it was that dropped off pipe bombs the night before?
No, I don't think that any of what you said is very relevant, because the facts
It's not
speak
relevant.
for themselves.
Okay.
No, I don't think that it's relevant. I think talking about the FBI is really deflecting the attention from what really happened. A friend of mine, Michael Fanone, was a police officer who fought that day, who had a heart attack, who had a head injury, was beaten with flagpoles and beaten with sticks by people who were in that crowd. The officer who died of a stroke, shortly after. It's surprise. I think that it would be tough to say that the stress that he suffered from that did not have something to do with it. Ashley Babbitt broke into the Capitol. It's awful that anybody died. Police officers, you see the tape on camera, telling everyone to stand down as she tried to enter. She was not complying. As people say, when police officers or officials tell you to do something, one should comply. And when she tried to break into the Capitol and defy the officers' commands, they did what they had to do, and she ended up dying. It's awful that it happened, but to say that she died, and I insinuate that it was because of some nefarious actions by the officers, I just think that is, beyond the pale and does not actually fit a solid narrative of what actually happened.
Well, it's very dizzying. I'm actually dizzy right now because your entire perspective has been pro BLM, and your entire perspective on your network has been essentially that it was totally fine for the officers that were bludgeoned, the officers that were killed, the officers all throughout New York City in the BLM riots. You even had Yale graduates.
Can we keep the focus?
Please let me finish. I just allowed you to finish. I just think it's nice to allow me to finish since I'm a guest on your show.
It is, but I want you to.
But you had them throwing bombs,
I want you to keep the focus on the insurrection and not on
Molotov
BLM.
cocktails. In the very same summer that you're talking about the insurrection, Molotov cocktails were thrown into police cruisers
Candace,
during the BLM George Floyd riots.
But
You didn't seem to have the same sensitivity toward police officers.
We're not talking about BLM. Can we?
But it's relevant because it was happening in the exact same city. Okay. And so suddenly, like I said, I'm just dizzy because I can't figure out whether or not you care about police officers or you don't care about them, because now you're sharing emotional stories and now you're cutting me off when I want to share one about a Molotov cocktail that was thrown into a police cruiser in New York by some college graduates, and the media, the platform that you were on, cheered it on because this was about justice. But suddenly when it's patriots, you want to talk about the sad stories of the police officers. You're now saying that because you don't comply, you can get shot. That's fine if that's your perspective, and Ashley Babbitt wasn't complying, but then we should probably revisit the George Floyd riots.
That was a good old-fashioned ass whooping, and that's because Don Lemon is saying things here that are verifiably untrue, such as that a police officer was killed during the Jan 6 protest. That factually did not happen. But the BLM riots, which Don Lemon loved so much, you'll remember those mostly peaceful protests. They were responsible for the death of actual police officers, as well as many civilians, and many businesses were destroyed. Buildings were burnt down. That's what an actual violent, ideologically motivated civil unrest looks like. And it definitely falls into the category of terrorism. But as Don says, just stay focused, Candace, because that's not what we're talking about. That's not relevant at all. What we're talking about is Jan 6, when the orange man, the bad orange man, nearly single-handedly overthrew democracy and ruined democracy forever. And guys, something you'll notice throughout this interview is that Don just lies, and he just says things that are, like we said, verifiably untrue, and they only require a cursory amount of research. And the thing is that when he was at CNN, he could get away with this sort of thing But in this sort of format, it doesn't really work as much as he's trying to make it work.
Last comment. No, yeah, I'm going to cut you off. Can we please cut him off? Can we take him off the screen? Can we take him? Can we get rid of John Fredericks? Thank you.
You see, on CNN, they have 4 minutes with the person. His writers give him the questions to ask. He asks the questions in a way that makes him look like he knows what he's talking about. And if they ever start trying to actually make a good point, he just cuts them off. And he's trying to do that with Candace in these interviews, but it doesn't come across very well. And it's very clear that somebody's writing his questions for him. Now on to the next bit about transgenderism and whether or not it's a mental disorder.
Because I realized that these conversations matter. These are not just talking points. This is not somebody talking in a news hit. This is going to have real world implications for my children.
Listen,
and giving you one example of that would be the dawn of the trans indoctrination that you and I did not go through in school. That to me is a very severe thing. I think it's demonic, quite literally demonic, as in, worshiping Baphomet. It goes back a long time. And I'm going to use my platform.
You said worshiping what? I couldn't hear you. Sorry.
Baphomet.
Okay, got it. Well, here's the thing. I don't know about, I'm not sure I would call it an indoctrination. I do believe that it's legitimate to say that you have questions about it because it's a lot to take in. I wouldn't necessarily call it an indoctrination. And when I grew up, there were definitely trans people. And maybe there wasn't an awareness of it in the world or the country at large. But I remember trans people growing up. I remember people who were cross-dressers growing up. My girlfriend's brother was a transvestite growing up. So there were definitely people who were out there who were part of the trans community. And I remember the threats that Chris got from my girlfriend's brother. I remember people on the street throwing things at him and threatening him. So I'm not sure it's an indoctrination. I think it's just maybe an awareness of things that happen in society. And that doesn't mean that the pendulum doesn't swing too far sometimes, but I'm not sure I would call it an indoctrination. That's all I have to say about that.
Well, when I was in school, I learned that it was a mental disorder. I know that's changed, but it was in the DSM-5 as a mental disorder. And I accept that there are mental disorders, and people that are suffering from mental disorders should never be treated by people harassing them or people yelling at them or calling them names. So I'm sorry that someone that you knew went through that. But when people had mental disorders, it wasn't commonplace to try to teach them about and normalize the mental disorders in classrooms, because children are experimenting with ideas and children always want to be different. Yeah. And if you say to kids, obviously propaganda works. If you tell kids smoke cigarettes, they all start smoking cigarettes. We've learned this. And then in my generation, we stomped out smoking cigarettes because of the reverse course on that and saying no, actually cancer kills. They taught us in the classroom that cancer kills. And now the majority of people who were smoking like crazy in the 80s are not smoking anymore. So we know that psychological conditioning works, and that the majority of these 12-year-olds, 11-year-olds, 10-year-olds are not non-binary. They're just learning that as a way to be different, they can experiment with these things. And unfortunately, these have very evil results because kids are being put on drugs that are quite literally used on pedophiles.
Guys, if you're enjoying this exchange and if you like being kept armed and dangerous, don't forget to smash that like button. It helps me out enormously. And also subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Back to it.
Well, that's not necessarily so. But listen, let me just say that about
I think there are a lot of things on pedophiles in prison that's what's being given to children.
There's a lot to respond to that as far as the indoctrination. If it was an indoctrination, then I went to a Catholic school, so then I would be, a straight male married to a woman who attends church every single day. If there was any sort of indoctrination that was happening, so apparently the indoctrination at the Catholic school did not work on me because I ended up being the exact opposite of what they wanted. The other thing is that the whole idea that they're giving young children drugs at an age, and the children are getting to decide at an age that they need these medical drugs for transitioning, that is absolutely not true.
What do you mean that's not true?
And also,
You can get puberty blockers as a child. I had a whole person on my show who I spoke to that transition
of the family, and the family. You can get puberty blockers as a child, but the parents have to decide that. That's not some
so they can get
child
puberty blockers.
who's decided. The parent and the child gets to decide that. So
okay, but that they should puberty blockers fundamentally alter them for life.
Disorder. You understand that it has not been, it's been deemed not to be a mental disorder, and then you're saying that that you're. In your rhetoric, you're saying that it's a mental disorder.
It is a mental disorder. That's what I learned in school.
It's not a mental disorder.
Okay, if you think that you're a boy and you're actually a girl, you are suffering from a mental disorder, obviously, because you can't actually change your sex, obviously.
I know plenty of children now. I know plenty.
You can play dress up, but you can't change your sex. I know plenty
of young people and old people who are trans, right? And they are not pretending. And it is not a mental disorder.
Well, it is pretending, because you will literally never be able, if you are a little boy, to grow up and have a baby, because you're not a little girl.
I would hope that your child would not grow up, or your children would not grow up, and then thinking that they're trans, and then their parents telling them the exact opposite.
I would tell them that they have a mental disorder, and we're going to get them help.
It's not a mental disorder, Candace. I don't even know what she's talking about here.
I've got both worlds. I lived growing up as a male, and I got to experience what that was like, and now I get to see the other side. It's a whole nother world, different rules. It's beautiful. I understand all sides.
Have you guys heard this one? Oh!
You see, Don Lemon has authority in this situation because he knows people who are trans, and when he was younger, his girlfriend's brother used to wear a dress, which, I mean, just that story alone is quite on the nose for multiple reasons. But anyways, I don't know what Candace's argument is here. How can you refute the Diva Don's logic on this one? I mean, if I were to just tomorrow start referring to myself as Jacqueline, and I decided to start wearing dresses, then all of my close family and friends would literally just carry on as if nothing happened. So a ridiculous point there by Candace, and I'm glad that Don Lemon was able to destroy her worldview with anecdotes and emotion. But seriously, ladies and gentlemen, that attitude there from Diva Don Lemon, the whole there's nothing wrong with them, they're living their truth, and if you don't affirm them, then you are a bigot and a transphobe. That is precisely why we are in the situation that we are in right now, where first of all, this was ever allowed to happen, and second of all, the sexualization and the indoctrination of children isn't met with an instant, full-scale civil resistance. It's because of people like Don Lemon. And on to the next part now, where things get very spicy indeed.
The big piece, by the way, the reason why they cut out those 4 seconds and didn't talk about the entire monologue was because most Americans don't know about the other Holocaust that took place in the world, right? Where we can only talk about the feelings. You're talking about how people felt in your staff about a 4-second clip. Well, why don't you go talk to some of the Christians and maybe ask them how they feel about how it feels that when we talk about the Christian Holocaust, which is what this episode was about, the 12 million Germans that were ethnically cleansed, the Bolsheviks who mass murdered Christians, Henry Kagoda, who was the greatest mass murderer of the 20th century, who put us into concentration camps. Suddenly the media gets mad and they take out 4 seconds and they, again, somehow make it about Jewish people in the Holocaust. That's not the only Holocaust that happened. And I will use my platform to speak about the atrocities that Christians face, and I will do so unapologetically. So if you're looking for an apology for me saying that the idea that the Nazi scientists did this and it was so horrific that we then decided to bring them over to the United States, you're not going to get one. I'm at a place where I'm really tired of everybody's feelings mattering more than the history of what was done to Christians.
Okay.
I think it's okay for us to talk about the Christian Holocaust. It's 2024. Okay. Let's talk about the Bolshevik Revolution and what they did to Christians.
Why do you feel the need then to defend Nazis? Or
Nazis aren't alive anymore, so we got to stop you calling everybody a Nazi.
Why do you feel the need then to sort of go down this rabbit hole and to defend something that was horrific and to say that why are you comparing what happened in the Holocaust to other atrocities? Because it's awful. Why can't you just stick with the Holocaust? And
why can't I cover Christian history? What is this? What do you mean stick with the Holocaust? What do you mean by that?
People's actions? I don't understand that.
Nobody defended any actions. That episode was about the fact that after the war, and this was a BBC documentary, not a Candace Owens documentary. It's a BBC documentary and I played parts of the documentary. It talks about how the Allies committed atrocities against the German-speaking civilians. They were not people who voted for Hitler. They were not Nazis. They were children who were lined up and shot. Their bodies were thrown on the ground while they were alive, and they were rolled over on cars. The footage is in the BBC documentary. It's called The Savage Peace. When people watch this documentary, they are so astonished and shocked that we didn't learn about it in school that they begin asking real serious questions. And one of those questions that you ask is, why are we not told about the mass killing of Christians all around the world? What you just said, like, why can't we just let it be about the Holocaust? What is that? Well, that's like the most selfish thing in the entire world. Let me finish. The most selfish thing in the entire world is for me to spend an hour talking about the atrocities that innocent Christians who had nothing to do with Adolf Hitler faced, and then to have Zionist media talking heads somehow make it about the Holocaust. It's not about the Holocaust, okay? Christians suffered too. In fact, we are the most persecuted religion in the world. And I am so sick of it. I am so sick of there can only be one victim narrative. And if you start talking about,
and we are not the most persecuted in the world. Come on.
That is a fact. What are you saying? We're not the most persecuted religion in the world. Do you know what's happening in Armenia? Do you know what's happening in Nigeria? Do you know what just happened in Canada? The fake story that was propagated by all of the mainstream networks about the nuns, and they found the mass burial, which allowed 85 Catholic churches to be burned to the ground in the last 3 years in Canada. We are still being persecuted right now. Okay. So I take great offense to you coming in here about the sensitivities of the people that are working on your show when I'm sitting here telling you that I'm a Christian and I'm offended by what you're saying, and you laugh. You mock Christian persecution. Do you think people to laugh when someone tells you about Christian persecution? Because let me tell you something. If I had done that, I think it's laughable about the Holocaust, I don't think it's funny. I would be chased out of polite society. Then don't laugh. Don't laugh at Christian persecution. Don't do it.
Laughable is mean that the name is in the term. It's laughable.
Do not laugh. You literally just laughed when I talked about Christian persecution. Don't do that ever again. Not in my presence.
What you're saying is, okay, Candace, thank you. So what you're saying is, oh, you know what? The Holocaust was bad, but look over here. These people were worse than the Holocaust, so we should.
That's not that. First off,
that's what it sounds like. I'm telling you, that's what it sounds like.
You just said you didn't watch the episode.
No, but I'm saying that's what it sounds like. That's what you're saying. I don't have to watch the episode. I was listening to the words that you just said. You just spent 3 or 4 minutes talking about the other atrocities and how bad they were.
Yes, the other atrocities that have happened in human history outside of the Holocaust are things that we are relevant and allowed to talk about, especially when the numbers of Christians that were persecuted following the Russian Revolution and the manner in which they were killed, people that were beheaded, priests that were shot. Yes, it is. I can talk about Christian history, and I don't need to feel guilty about that, and I won't.
That's fine. All right, good. You don't have to feel guilty. You don't have to.
And please, genuinely. Please never, please, when I come on your show, have enough respect not to laugh when I talk about Christian persecution, because you would never do that if I was Jewish and I was talking about the Holocaust.
You can't tell
me. You would never do that.
You should have enough respect to know not to tell people how to react. You can't tell someone not to laugh.
Okay. Well, then I double dare you when a Jewish person is talking about persecution of Jews to laugh. You won't do it.
I won't do it because I actually believe that there were persecution of Jews, and
you don't believe that Christians were persecuted.
My thought. I believe that there is persecution of Christians. I don't think it's the most persecuted religion in the world.
Let's go Queen. And by Queen in this situation, I mean Candace Owens. You see, guys, this is where Candace is getting so much resistance at the moment, especially when she brings up issues of the 20th century. But the things she's talking about here are just facts. And it's something that people seem a bit terrified to talk about. And even when I talk with other Christians about the persecution of Christians and the mass persecution of Christians in the 20th century, they get weird and silent and even reject the information at times. It's like we're not allowed to talk about anything but the Holocaust. And all of the major movies are about the Holocaust: The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, Schindler's List, Night and Fog, and many more. It's obviously a horrible event in human history, and Jewish people have the right to mourn that event, and they have the right to make films and talk about the event and try and ensure that that never happens again. But the same standard should apply for everybody else who wants to talk about the history of their people. The Chinese people should be able to mourn the fact that tens of millions of people died under communism in China in the 20th century. A third of the Cambodian population was murdered under communism. They should be able to talk about this. And honestly, normally when I bring this up to people, they don't even know that that genocide occurred, and that was in the 1970s. And as Candace often alludes to, how about the millions of Christians who were killed by the Bolsheviks after, of course, they murdered the Tsar and his entire family? Or the millions of Ukrainians who were starved to death during the Holodomor famine? Christians should be allowed to talk about these historical events. Or the millions of Germans that were ethnically cleansed in peacetime after World War II. I can't even discuss on YouTube the kinds of things that happened to these people when the Soviets came in to Germany after it fell. Christians should be able to talk about this. And I know that these issues can be very uncomfortable to talk about sometimes, and they definitely require a lot of nuance. But if you're speaking about historical facts, then it's important to be able to just tell the truth. Moreover, this bleeds into the modern day persecution of Christians that is happening still. The Christian population of the Middle East was living mostly peacefully in places like Syria and Iraq until a few decades ago, and now these communities have basically been decimated and driven out. Yes, there was a large Christian community in the Middle East, the place that happens to be the cradle of civilization and where Christianity was actually born, and the place that is home to many different holy sites. But since that region was plunged into war and chaos, things have not been the same. And if you guys would like to hear more about this, then you can check out my interview on the Reality Based podcast with Kevork Almassian. Very insightful. But anyways, on to the next part now about Diva Don's big gay marriage.
Here's something interesting that we may have some common ground on, okay? But what do you think about same-sex marriage?
It's a sin.
You think it's a sin? So you think I'm
It is a
sinful?
sin. What's that?
You think I'm sinful because I'm married to a man?
Yeah.
You do?
Yes, you're sinning. You are in a sinful relationship. I actually don't believe marriage can be between two men. So I don't.
But you understand, though, Candace, and maybe we're not going to agree on this now. I thought we would. Do you understand, though, that the same Bible verses and the same scriptures that are used to call same-sex marriage sinful are used to call interracial marriage sinful as well? And so there are people who would say that you are in a sinful marriage.
Can you tell me which verse it is that would make people say?
The thing is that it's actually not there, and that people twist the Bible verses. That's my whole point. Thank you for proving that, because it doesn't say that. And it's actually, you're going to say Leviticus or whatever. It's not actually what Leviticus says. But go on. I don't want to get into specifics about the Bible, but that's not what the Bible says. It's just people using and interpreting Scripture in a way that they want to interpret it. So, look. You can believe whatever you want to believe. I don't believe that I'm in a sinful marriage, but there are people who believe, Candace Owens, that you are in a sinful marriage because you are in an interracial marriage. And I say that as someone who is in an interracial marriage, so I am doubly sinful.
Yeah, I've never heard anybody make a biblical argument against people being married that are black and white. So that's why I said, can you just tell me what verse that was? Sodomy is obviously a sin, but I've never heard a biblical argument. I'm happy to learn. I honestly, I'm happy to learn.
Sodomy is not just for gay sex, right? You know that, right? Sodomy is.
Yeah, it's a sin always, by the way.
Yeah, it's a sin between, it can be a sin between heterosexuals as well.
Yes, that's correct.
So, okay, but you've never heard that interracial marriage was sinful?
I've never heard somebody make a biblical argument for interracial. I've never, and that's why I'm saying if you could present that to me, and if maybe you're familiar with what verse that was.
Yeah, but actually it's not a biblical argument. It's also a religious argument as well, more so than anything, that you're in a sinful marriage and that black and white people should not be married.
I mean, I'm obviously very aware that people could think that ideologically, but I've never heard that biblical argument made ever in my life. And I'm happy to be proven wrong here, but I think you made that up on the spot there.
So by saying that, no, I didn't actually, but by saying that you believe that I'm in a sinful marriage, does that mean, though, that I should be discriminated against?
No, I've never called for discrimination.
So you believe in the separation of church and state, then?
Heterosexual couples can sin as well. I mean, I hope that you deal with that. I want you to be Christian and to understand why it is that sodomy is a sin and what else it yields in society. I believe that marriage is between a man and a woman.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that you believe that I should be discriminated against. I don't
believe
I should be able to have, under the Constitution, you believe that I have the same rights as you and other heterosexuals, and that my marriage is just as valid under the Constitution as anybody else's, including.
Well, I believe that the problem became that gets into a deeper theological discussion, but like the government should have never taken marriage away from the church. It should have been something that was maintained as a church practice. And so a lot of things happened there when the government took over and began marrying people, because then the arguments became, well, you get a tax break if you're married. And that is a way longer discussion that we can have on a different day. But to answer your question, I would never want any person based on their sins to ever be discriminated against, ever. I mean, I don't believe in discrimination. I don't believe that people should be treated differently. I think people should get help you know, and like we were just talking about with trans indoctrination, I believe that's a mental illness and people should seek help. But I don't believe that they should be discriminated against. I would never be okay with that. Okay. I mean, I have people that are, you know, gay and lesbians in my life. I have cousins who are lesbians. So it's not, I don't have hatred in my heart.
You have Jewish friends? You have gay friends?
I'm trying to be funny.
Do you have gay friends? I want to know.
Yes, I actually don't have, like, I really kind of feel like I only hang out with my family right now. So I'm a little, I've got 3 kids under 3, so I don't really have friends right now, but yeah, sure.
No, seriously, you don't have gay friends?
Well, I have gay people in my family. So yeah, that's the extent of my friendships with gay people.
Are you homophobic? No, seriously.
You're such an absurd
I thought you would say,
being.
Of course I have gay friends.
You're just such an absurd being. First off, the person that you're just an absurd human being. Are you homophobic? Oh, I'm just like, what does homophobia actually mean? Can you give me a definition of homophobia? If I was homophobic, would I be doing like this show? Do you think I'm like scared? Like I'm like, oh my God, look, there's a gay man. I'm so scared. It's
no, not at all.
To have a phobia is like to have a phobia. A fear of, like, you know, you think I fear like 2 gay men that are walking down the street holding hands, like, and I'm just like, oh my God, I'm so scared. I don't fear anything but God. That's it.
Yeah. Well, I don't think God is to be feared, but anyways, I'm just surprised that you don't have any gay friends, because that, you know, I just am.
Okay, guys. So once again, Don Lemon reading out the questions that he's been given, pretending that he knows the Bible and he's got some sort of a gotcha moment there, and getting totally exposed. He claims that having an interracial marriage is just as sinful as having a gay marriage. Which, by the way, guys, gay marriage, you can say, is it right, is it wrong? But the fact of the matter is that it doesn't exist. There is no such thing as gay marriage, because marriage is a religious sacrament whereby a man and a woman become one flesh, and that is ordained by God. But Don calls himself a Christian and doesn't think that being engaged in gay marriage is a sin. Leviticus 18:22, you shall not lie with a male as with a woman. It's an abomination. Leviticus 20:13, if a man lies with a male as with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination. 1 Corinthians says, do not be deceived, neither the sexually immoral or idolaters, nor adulterers, nor men who practice homosexuality, nor thieves, nor the greedy, nor drunkards, nor revilers, nor swindlers will inherit the kingdom of God. Romans 1:27 says, all the men likewise gave up their natural relations with women and were consumed with passion for one another, men committing shameless acts with men and receiving in themselves the due penalty for their error. So, I mean, I'll be the first to admit that we all struggle with sin. We all fall short of the grace. But to say that it's not sinful when there's so much evidence throughout the Bible that it is indeed a sinful act to be with another man is just delusional, and you're gaslighting your audience. So, guys, that's it for me today. Hopefully this video doesn't get instantly demonetized, probably will. If you want to find me below, you can find my links. If you'd like to subscribe to the channel, right here. If you'd like to watch another one, right here. Till next time, I'm Jake. It's RattlesnakeTV, keeping you armed and dangerous.